Welcome to What's the Deal by Bluegrass Realtors, your go-to source for the latest housing trends, market insights, and industry updates from the heart of the Bluegrass region. Whether you're buying, selling, or just curious about the market, we're here to help keep you informed with all the info you need to make confident real estate decisions. Hey everybody, welcome to this month's edition of the What's the Deal podcast of Bluegrass Realtors. Today we are welcoming back Dr. Michael Clark with the University of Kentucky Center for Business and Economic Research. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Thank you. So today we're going to be talking about the second quarter stats and just, looking through some of the reporting that you're starting to create for us. But let's kick off with the economy. When we talked last time, you mentioned that the national economy was slowing and that the risk of a recession had increased. Is this still the case? And if not, what's changed?
Well, the economy certainly is continuing to slow, but it has beaten some expectations. Where we were last time, we were starting to see the effects of monetary tightening. The idea was to combat the inflation that we've been experiencing for the past few years, is to raise interest rates. As we raise interest rates, that causes consumption to slow down. And as consumption slows down, that means prices don't increase as much. And so the idea behind that was to slow down the economy. So we're kind of seeing that the economy is kind of following that pattern that we were expecting, in that general sense that it was slowing down. But what we had started to see is that there was starting to be a lot of concern about how quickly the economy might be slowing down, a lot of the risk that was potentially out there. And so national forecasters were starting to assess the probability that we might go into a recession higher than what they had been. So far, what we've seen, 6 months into 2025, is that the economy is slowing down, but it has been fairly resilient. We don't seem to be tipping into that recession area that we were starting to get concerned about 3 months or so ago. So employment growth has slowed, but it has not slowed quite as quickly as what we had anticipated. And so, we are continuing to see some improvement in terms of employment and GDP, which is gross domestic product. That's that measure of the things that we produce, the goods and services. So, both of those are continuing to grow, but at a slower, more sustainable pace.
That's good. Well, then what about the state and local economy?
Same type of thing, basically. So, if you go to any of my presentations or our Outlook conference or anything like that, you'll hear me talk about how we like to think of ourselves as really different. And, we've got a somewhat different economy, but really we are very integrated into the national economy. So we're starting to see a lot of the same type of things in Kentucky as what we see nationally. Employment has continued to grow. That's a good signal. It has grown at a somewhat slower pace than what we had seen over the last few years. But again, a much more sustainable level. And we're seeing the same thing if you look at the Lexington MSA. Employment is, again, continuing to grow. So, good news on those fronts. Just, we're not growing as fast as what we had in the past.
But, sometimes that sustained, slower growth is actually a good thing. So it's good to see that resilience in the economy. And we're definitely going to dig into some of the specifics of the housing market, but I'm just going to hit the big question realtors want to know right off the bat is when might we see some movement in the mortgage rates?
Chris, that's the really important question here. And it's also the question that we struggle the most to actually answer. And so, if we want to look bad, we actually go ahead and actually put a real number on there, right? Because we set ourselves up for failure if we do that. If you look at where mortgage rates have been and where other types of interest rates have been over the last 6 months or so, they seem to have been relatively steady. Now, if you look at the weekly data, you do see some movement, up and down a little bit. But over the last 6 months, they've been surprisingly stable. And I think where we're at is everybody, in terms of this lending market, is kind of in this waiting period. We're waiting to see what's going to happen in terms of the Federal Reserve. Well, the Federal Reserve is also in kind of this waiting pattern. They're trying to understand what's happening in terms of the general economy, so they can know whether or not interest rates are at the right level to continue to fight inflation, or whether they need to be more accommodative to speed up economic growth. And there's a lot of uncertainty with that at the moment. And a lot of that has to do with tariffs and trade policy, which can have an inflationary effect. And to the extent that they see that there's risk for inflation, they will tend to keep interest rates relatively high. Now, generally, kind of what I'm seeing is, I look at, some of the national forecasts that are out there is that there's an expectation that we might see a setup later this year for the Federal Reserve to start lowering interest rates. And so we might start to see interest rates decline in the later portion of 2025 and then into 2026. So how much they're going to decline, that of course, remains to be seen. Exactly what that timing is, again, that's another difficult thing for us to predict.
Yeah, both the timing and the amount, right? We see a lot of differences, and some people think it's going to be a little bit, some people think it might be a little more drastic. I don't think anybody's saying really drastic, but we do see a lot of differences in opinion here.
Yeah, we do. I kind of liken this to if you'd asked me what the score of the UK basketball game is going to be, before it starts, and I'll give you my answer about what I think it's actually going to be. And then if you wait 10 minutes into the game, you might ask me again, and you're likely to get a different answer, because what I'm doing is I'm getting some information as the game progresses about, who's playing well, is somebody, in foul trouble or something like that. Then I tell you, by the time we actually get to the end of that game, I get pretty good at actually predicting that number. But until then, you might be better off to ask my wife, actually, about what the score is going to be. But it's the same type of thing when we're forecasting the economy. We're all reading this data and we're trying to understand what this means. But there is a lot of uncertainty in terms of how a lot of these national issues are going to play out. And so, the general agreement that I'm kind of seeing across national forecasters is that, they do expect that interest rates are going to start to decline. It's just really a question of by how much. And this is fairly common, right? I mean, there's not going to be this general agreement that it's going to decline by this much. There's going to be a lot of disagreements, but the general agreement is about the direction that we think the interest rates are going to decline over the next year and a half. But it's really a question of when and how much. And, people who, spend their entire careers doing these type of things and follow this closely will have somewhat different opinions about what those magnitudes might be.
And you kind of mentioned there a little bit about them decreasing. Of course, realtors want to see that because they see buyer demand go up. And we're going to get into that more in a little bit. But I want to kind of park on the economy just for a couple more questions here. We heard a lot about concerns about that tariffs could affect construction costs. Are we seeing construction costs rising?
Construction costs continue to rise, but they are rising at a slower pace. So one of the measures that we like to look at is something that the U.S. Census Bureau produces. They do a housing cost index or a construction cost index. They do it for single-family homes and for multifamily homes. And the single-family homes, I think the construction cost as of June was up about 3.3% compared to what it was in June last year. Mm-hmm. So construction costs are continuing to increase, but they're doing so at a much slower pace than what we have seen during the heat of the pandemic. We're not seeing those types of crazy large increases. And actually, if you go back and you look historically, like 2019, and I hate to keep referring to 2019 as kind of the most recent normal year we've had, right. Because the economy is quite a bit different than it was in 2019. That's kind of that pre-pandemic before everything kind of went crazy. Mm-hmm. But we're in levels that are fairly comparable to that. Now, if you start looking into what seems to be driving some of these changes in construction costs, well, there's some good news and there's some concerning news. On the energy side, energy prices are actually pretty low. So energy costs going down have been a good thing for housing construction. Lumber costs have increased, but if you look, like from month to month, we maybe have starting to see a bit of a relief from that. One area where we've seen some increases is in the area of steel products. Steel mills sheet metal, things of that nature. Some of the metal markets, we've actually seen that the prices this year are considerably higher than what we saw last year. And of course, I think a lot of people will start thinking about what could be potentially driving it. Part of that is just the usual supply and demand issues. Part of it could be speculation about where tariffs are going to end up. One of the things that we often discuss is that when we think about tariffs and the potential increase in the cost is even before those tariffs go into place, we might see some people purchase things in anticipation of those increases, trying to get ahead of the increase. And that in and of itself can actually cause prices to increase because temporarily demand goes up. As demand goes up, that tends to put upward pressure on prices. So, overall, yeah, construction costs are increasing, mostly in line with kind of what we'd seen prior to the pandemic. But there is still some risk in terms of what could potentially happen in terms of any future tariffs.
And then, let's just kind of wrap up one last thing on the tariffs there, because you mentioned it with both the interest rates and the construction costs, and a lot of uncertainty is out there, of course, as the Trump administration goes and does these trade deals and things like that. And I know a very recent announcement was the EU trade deal. And I'm talking with some people. There's a general sense that as we get more of these trade deals in place, it reduces the uncertainty. So it might make some of these things we're talking about a little more positive. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think uncertainty is not particularly good for the economy. Now, there are certain areas that maybe thrive in terms of uncertainty and can actually benefit from that. But generally, in terms of the overall health of the economy, and particularly in terms of certain types of markets, uncertainty is not good. And that was one of the concerns that we had earlier in the year is how firms might respond to the uncertainty over U.S. trade policy. If there's uncertainty, then businesses may be uneasy about making investments, planning for the future. And as they pause those investments, that means that we're not going to get the economic growth associated with those investments. We may not get productivity increases that come along with those investments. As we start to see trade policy firm up, that uncertainty go away. Whether it's an increase in a tariff or a decrease or no change, once that's kind of put into place and businesses are confident that yes, this is kind of where things are going to settle, then they can start making plans for whatever the changes might be. And they can start thinking about, all right, well, now does it make sense for us to make this type of investment in this particular location? So as that uncertainty kind of goes away, as things really kind of firm up in terms of what that trade policy is going to be, I think it does help the economy start moving.
Thank you for that explanation there. So now we're going to head into the more specific to our area housing market stuff. But the first thing I want to do is I want to take a second and let's just talk about kind of statistics in general. So in your analysis, you do a lot of segmenting the market into quintiles. What does that mean, and what can it tell us about the housing market?
Okay, so it's a really good question because I think economists are really bad about jargon. And I apologize for my profession right now, but we come up with these terms that really, and this is more of a statistics term, but the average person may not understand. Well, when we're coming up with these statistics, what we're trying to do is describe the general situation in this case, the housing market. And you may have heard statistics like the mean or the median. And even those, those are fairly common. Those are really different numbers. And they both characterize what's going on in terms of the housing market, but they're often misunderstood. So when we talk about mean, what we're talking about is the average. The problem, though, with the average is it can be pulled around, and this is really true in the housing market. It can be pulled around by some extreme values. So you think about a small geographic area where you're tracking housing sales, and the mean may be, I'm making up a number, average housing selling price may be like $300,000, and then one house for $10 million sells. That $10 million sale could really pull that mean up. Mm-hmm. And so the next month the mean seems to go down dramatically because that we don't have that really expensive house being sold. So the mean is really subject to these extreme values and can bounce around quite a bit. So what we like to do is we like to come up with other statistics that are more stable. One that we do is the median. What the median means, it's that point, that price at which half of the houses are above that price and half are below. And because we're doing that half, that $15 million house that sold doesn't pull that median up so much. What quintiles are is basically the same kind of concept, but instead of breaking it into two groups, those above this number, half above, half below, what we're doing is we're breaking it into 5 equal groups. We have the lowest 20%, that would be the bottom in terms of the price distribution, for example. So 20% would be below a particular number. We also look at the next 20%, middle 20%, and then we got 2 more categories. That would be the top 20% basically. So the idea is to break housing market into different segments based on prices. So when we talk about quintiles, we're talking about 1/5 of the houses that sold in a particular market, for example. And it's really useful to do that because anybody who works in the real estate market understands houses are not a commodity. They are not uniform. They are not often not very similar. They have huge differences. And so by breaking it into quintiles, we can get a better sense of how the market may be behaving differently in certain segments. And so I think that's a really useful thing for us to understand, because I think intuitively we know that. It's just this helps us kind of flesh out those numbers a little bit better.
Yeah, exactly. And as we get into it, like one of the things that I like most about this is, when you talk to realtors, they'll tell you, okay, well, you're saying days on market is 30 days, but man, I'm working like gangbusters and selling them in 7. And when you look at it, it's because that person is working in the below median market, whereas above median market, it could be 40 or 50 days. And these are not the actual numbers from the report. I'm just making a thing here. And breaking down by quintiles is kind of confirming what realtors know in their gut anyways. And I think you're going to see a lot of that. But we also found some really surprising stuff in here too. Okay, so let's dig into that. So the supply of houses for sale has been a major concern. Are we seeing any signs of relief?
We are seeing some signs of relief. And again, there's always, this mix of good news, bad news, in terms of what this means. We have actually seen, if you look at the Bluegrass Realtor Service area, we're actually seeing the number of new listings improve. There were about 5,500 new listings during the second quarter of 2025, and that's a pretty substantial increase over what we saw last year. So we're seeing more listings come up, so that's good. Sales are a bit down though, so we are seeing that houses are on the market a bit longer. This is good for the buyer, I guess. In terms of there's more listings available. Houses aren't necessarily moving quite as quickly, but the bad side of this, of course, is from the seller's perspective. Then it means that it's taking longer for them to actually sell their house.
Okay, so it sounds like we're definitely seeing a lot more of an increase in inventory, which is certainly good for buyers. But how have house prices changed?
So housing prices are continuing, of course, to grow. Again, just confirming what realtors already know. And we look at a number of different measures for this. If we look at the houses that sold within the Bluegrass Realtors Service District, what we saw is that when we look at the median price sold, it was up in the second quarter of 2025 by about 4.7% compared to the same quarter last year. It's a bit higher than what we saw in terms of the increase during the first quarter of 2025, but it's lower than what we've seen throughout most of 2024. So housing prices are continuing to increase, but not at as quick of a pace as what we've seen in the past. Now, one of the issues is when we look at the housing sales in the Bluegrass Realtors region, we're looking at all the houses that are selling, and one of the things that's problematic about that is that when we do that, we may see in a different quarter different types of houses selling. And that can contribute to the increase that we're observing. So the issue is, maybe more this quarter, more expensive houses sold, or maybe less expensive houses sold. And so as a result of that, we've seen a lot of different groups have developed measures that rely on repeated purchases. And so the idea there is we're controlling for, or we can better control for the fact that these houses that are being sold may be different, and really get to, are we actually seeing the houses increase in terms of the selling price? And the Federal Housing Finance Agency actually publishes a housing price index that does this. The downside of this is the data is not as current, and so the most recent data we have is from 2025. But they were finding kind of similar numbers, that when you look at year-over-year increases, both Kentucky and the U.S. were seeing roughly around 4% increases. So it does seem to kind of confirm what we're seeing in terms of the data for the Bluegrass Realtors region.
And one just kind of quick side note here, because we've mentioned Bluegrass Realtors region a couple times, is you and I have talked about breaking this down more, because we certainly have 38 different counties, and I know down around the Somerset and London area the market will be a little different than around the Fayette County area. So we will be breaking that down more in the future. This is just kind of step one for us working together here. Okay, so let's actually, while we're talking about prices there, one of the really interesting things that stepped out to me in this was talking about the difference in quintiles. So one of the big ones we noticed was the percent price change in the lowest 20% versus the highest 20%. So talk about that some for us.
Yeah, so again, breaking by quintile allows us to kind of get into this issue of these are really different markets within the housing market. And so when we go through and we look at the median, we were seeing about 4.7% increase. But that really differed when we started looking at these different market segments. If you go to the highest 20% of houses that sold, what defines that that quintile is those are houses that sold for more than 425,000. So 425,000 and above. Pretty wide range. But if you look at those houses, we were seeing that that quintile, that 425% threshold that defines that quintile, was up about 2.4% compared to the same quarter last year. But now let's go down to the bottom part of the price spectrum. We look at the lowest 20%. These were houses that sold for 195,000 or less. The 195,000 breakpoint defining that quintile, that was up about 8.3% compared to the same quarter last year. Now, if you look at the dollar changes, the dollar change in the lowest quintile was around 15,000. The dollar change in the highest quintile was, I think, around 10,000 or so. But because those are much more expensive houses, that increase was, relatively small compared to, what they'd been experiencing. But that 15,000 for that lowest quintile, that was a pretty significant increase in that particular market segment.
And then that's also reflected in the median difference between sold and list price as well. So go into that a little bit for
us. So we were really interested in understanding this difference between the selling price and the list price. And that's a fairly common metric that we see discussed. And when I talk to people who are searching for a house, a lot of times they're anecdotally saying, well, I'm having to offer, pretty much exactly what they're asking for. Well, it turns out when you start breaking down the market into these different quintiles, we start to see that really differs. If we look at kind of that middle segment, that middle 20%, or maybe the second highest 20% in terms of the market, then that's pretty true. Particularly that second highest 20%, what we are seeing is that the selling price and the listing prices weren't that different. But when we start moving into the lowest priced houses, we start to see more differences or larger differences between the selling price and the list price. During the second quarter of 2025, what we saw is that the selling price, the median selling price, gotta be careful how I define this, it gets a little tricky. The median difference between the selling price and the list price was 2.9%. So selling prices were generally about 2.9% lower than the listing prices. So quite a bit different than what we were hearing in terms of the anecdotal information. So really showing that as you look across these different markets, you tend to see different things going on.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing we really want to push on here is not necessarily like, proving stories right or wrong as much as proving like there really is kind of a tale of two markets here. That's one of the things I talk about often is, first-time home buyers are having a pretty tough time right now. So let's just kind of step back into like that 10,000-foot view for a second there. And so what does that disparity in price growth between the lowest and highest suggest about affordability?
Well, when we look at these differences in terms of the price growth, I think it's important to put this in context of how income has changed. When you look at the highest 20%, that went up by about 2.4%. And you might want to compare that to income to understand how affordability has actually changed. Well, I don't actually have that measure of what their income has changed by today. But 2.4%, that's pretty similar to the inflation target for the Fed. They're looking to have inflation around 2%. If wages are going up by about 2%, then basically affordability is kind of staying about the same, right? Prices went up by 2.4%, but if my income is going up by 2.4%, then to some degree I can compensate for that. What we see in the lowest end, though, is we saw that prices were going up by about 8.3%. So if you're looking to buy in the lowest part of this market, then what you're finding is that the prices are increasing, and they're likely increasing at a much faster pace than your income is increasing, which makes that less affordable. So I do think, kind of what we're seeing in kind of this initial analysis is that lowest market has become has become less affordable.
Yeah, and I think that really highlights, there's always that saying about, the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago, the second best time is today. It's yes, interest rates are high right now, but I think what realtors will tell first-time home buyers is still get in when you can because these prices are not slowing down anytime soon. It doesn't seem like, at least. So definitely a big factor, a driving factor there for everybody considering trying to get into the market for the first time. So let's switch over to days on market a little bit. It's another place where we're seeing some differences. So let's just start off with, are we actually starting to see evidence that buyer demand is softening due to these rising prices or interest rates, and then especially in those lower quintiles, and then touch on your days on market differences while you're in there as well.
So days on market, that's a pretty normal statistic that's calculated for these different housing markets. And we've been hearing about the houses moving relatively quickly. So we really want to understand to what extent that's still happening. So when you look at median days on the market, kind of what we've been seeing over the last 3 quarters is that median days have been around 21 days. Mm-hmm. So half of the houses are taking longer, half are taking less time. And so we want to look at how that's been changing over time. And so what we actually found is that we've really kind of come back to a level that's fairly comparable to pre-pandemic in 2019. Again, I want to be careful about saying that's not now normal, but we've kind of returned to that level. And I was a bit surprised by that. I really wasn't expecting that we had quite gotten back to that point because anecdotally, a lot of what I hear is that houses are still moving at a fairly fast clip. And so we want to break that down a little bit. And so one of the things that we did is we kind of started looking at the distribution of days on the market across different groups in terms of the number of days. And what we want to understand is, well, how many are selling for within 15 days? And what we found is that during the second quarter of 2025, about half of the houses sold within 15 days. And that's still pretty fast, but that's actually very comparable to what we saw again in 2019. That second quarter of 2019, about half of the houses sold within 15 days. And again, I was kind of shocked by that because I guess I hadn't really worked with this type of data for a while. And we looked at this, going all the way back to 2009. And of course, 2009, we had the housing market crisis, and we had an oversupply of housing. And what we saw is that houses were generally taking a relatively long time to sell. By around 2016 through 2019, we started to see that really pick up. And of course, with the pandemic, houses are just selling really quickly. We really have kind of come back to where we were around 2019, or at least we're really close to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of realtors would say it still feels fast. I know it's certain. I think you are hearing a bit of a slowdown. So I guess just kind of wrap up on that is talk about that buyer demand. Like, what are you seeing in terms of even just outside of days on market? Like, is the market softening because of worry about interest rates, or is it still remaining pretty strong?
Yeah, I mean, I still think that the market overall is strong, but it's all relative, right? Relative to what? I do think buyers have softened a bit, partially due to price increases, partially due to the higher interest rates. Both of those contribute to make housing less affordable, and so a lot of people are kind of taking a wait and see. I suspect a lot of people are taking a kind of a wait and see, hoping that interest rates are going to start to come down. The potential concern with that is that, well, even as interest rates start to come down, demand responds to that. So while interest rates go down, demand might start to pick up, and that puts higher pressure on prices, and so that tends to offset some of the gains that we might get from interest rates. Kind of where we are is, I do think demand has softened. We see it in terms of the slower increases in prices, the longer time it's taking for houses to actually sell. None of these numbers are necessarily concerning, but they do suggest that buyers have softened a bit.
And so thank you for that. And again, thanks for coming on again. So everybody out there, Dr. Clark is going to be on here with us about 4 times a year. So, and as we mentioned a couple times, this is just the beginning. We're starting off here, and we are going to do much deeper dives into things. We're going to break things down into districts, and we're going to get some really interesting data out of this. So reach out, let us know what you want to hear. Let us know what you want to hear, what you want to see, what kind of things you're hearing that you think would be interesting to be proven, and all those kind of things, and just reach out and let us know where you'd like this to go. Also, make sure you tune in next month. We actually have 2 podcasts next month. The first is going to be Charlie Lee, Vice President of Legal with NAR, is going to be coming on, giving us kind of a legal update on everything that's going on there. And then we also have Jack Miller, the T360, is going to be coming on to talk about the world of brokerages and what they're seeing in kind of that macro broker level. So 2 really interesting podcasts next month. Make sure you tune in. Thank you again, Dr. Clark, for being here. Tune in next month for more information for What's the Deal podcast. That wraps up this episode of What's the Deal. We'll see you next time for more tips and updates from your trusted real estate source. Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an update, and catch us on social media on all the major platforms. If you have any real estate questions, feel free to reach out, and thanks for listening.